I'm here for the conversation. Conversation about conversation. If you think back of the great conversations you've had, what are some of the conversations that come to mind? Why do those particular conversations come to mind? Perhaps they're symbolic of something much deeper, of who you really are, of what your life stands for, of the way you interact with other people. Conversations have a symbolic and hidden meaning. Where is it hiding? Is it under your chair? Is it under there? Is it on this stage? It could be anywhere. Look. Two carrots, also symbolic of what's on offer in a great conversation. The first carrot is about what's possible. When you're in a great conversation, there are new perspectives, fresh ideas, some welcome surprises. And the other carrot, it's connectedness. When we're in a great conversation, we feel heard, we feel listened to, we are connecting with the other people. They see who we really are, and they say, that's okay. You can be you, I'll be me, and we find each other in that conversation. I'd like to leave these two carrots just here on the stage. Actually, I'll give it to my caretaker here. One for you and one for you. Okay, so you keep us on track, because what I'm going to do is share 4 ideas with you today about how to have even better conversations. Conversations that offer the carrot of connectedness and the carrot of possibility. I've actually put the 4 ideas on these 4 cards, and they're a bit like the 4 aces. And I've got my notes on the back. Okay. Right. Where do these ideas come from? They come from observations about what's working in conversations. My job is to facilitate conversations. I work with executive teams who are thinking, where are we going? With project teams who are saying, like, who are we? How are we going to get things done? And with larger communities who are saying, well, what do we stand for? How are we going to live together? And all of these groups have something in common. They're looking for inclusion, they want engagement, they want to build something together, have solidarity. And behind that, there's a hypothesis, which is, if we have better dialogue, will we get closer to the goals and ambitions and the intentions of what we're seeking in this group? So I've been doing a series of conversation experiments. I'm really not too into theory, I'm into practice. So with each project, we said, well, let's do an experiment and see what happens if we can deepen the conversations in these groups. So these 4 ideas are after 10 years of work with thousands of people involved, lots of cases, lots of interviews about what happened. We say, isn't it time we honed it down to just 4 ideas? 4 ideas that are not just for big groups, but for anybody who wants to have a better conversation. And that's what we're going to look at. Now, one of the things about many of these groups was they are very busy people. Big agendas, lots of ideas, always going to conferences, listening to people speak, always looking for new projects. It sounded a little bit like a TED audience, right? I mean, you are busy people who are, preoccupied with, you've got a mission. You don't just have a job, you have a purpose in life. You wouldn't be here if you weren't exploring ideas all the time. But one of the big advantages you have as a TED audience is you have a heightened imagination. So I'd like you to use your imagination for a moment and imagine an ocean of ideas. And floating across the sea are lots of ideas floating around. Now, if suddenly there was a hole in the ocean, those ideas would start rushing in. And in that space, they'd be mixing, mingling, and new ideas would be born. Well, think of our own brain as a place absorbing ideas. If we are so preoccupied with our own thoughts of what we want to say, sometimes we're not really present for what the other people want to say. Look at this room. Is this a space for conversation? Look at yourself. Are you a space for conversation? So I've been observing this for some time, but I thought when I was thinking, what's at the source of all this? Mixing and mingling of ideas, that's at the source. Where have we spotted this in our own lives? Mixing and mingling. Have you ever had a childhood? At least one. Very good. Okay. I had a very peculiar childhood. I didn't know it at the time, but when you go in the real world, you realize, my house was not normal. This is a photo of myself in front of one of my father's sculptures. My father is an artist, so when you said ideas, he said, let's explore it, let's explore the idea. My mother was a social worker and a writer, so if you had problems, you're like, let's talk about the problems. Great, more problems, let's talk about the problems. So in our house, we attracted a lot of people with problems and a lot of people in the arts, but what they had in common is they had a lot of ideas, and they were always exploring ideas, mixing and mingling of ideas. So for me, it was very natural growing up to see it's natural to talk about things and explore things and go in all different tangents and maybe come back on it and maybe not, but that there's satisfaction, there's desire, there's a wish, and how to create a space for those conversations. And there was a moment when things changed a little bit in the household. It was during the recession. Suddenly there was less work around, less money around. But conversely, people had more time. And a friend of my father's is an architect, and something had changed in my life too, because until now, I was a quiet observer, like in the photo, absorbing all the craziness in the background, but just intent on my little ice cream cone. But becoming a teenager, you start thinking, where are the boundaries in life? I'm my own person, I'm an independent, I'm going to come into my own space. And I was entered into a conversation with this architect friend of my father's. And there was no money, so there was no building, there was no revenue, so he had no projects, but he had time. And he was talking to me about what he was doing with his time. He was building the tallest, well, he wasn't building, he was designing the tallest building in the world. Okay, so we're sitting in a small studio apartment upstairs from a garage. His wife had already left him. Times are really tough, okay? But I'm designing the tallest building in the world. Now, if you go to Shanghai today and you look out on the horizon, you won't see that building. But when you looked around his apartment, from all those sketches, something else was rising out of those drawings. It was about aspiration, about getting your life in order, about making something out of nothing. That's conversation. The possibility of making something out of nothing. And that idea really shaped something in my viewpoint. And I think that conversations for all of us shape our views, and our views shape our lives, and our lives shape the world that we share. So if that's a chain reaction, what's important to know about when we are shaping a conversation? If conversations shape views, if views shape lives, if lives shape the world, how are we shaping the conversation? That's what I'd like to talk about. How are we shaping the conversation? And I've got 4 ideas to share. Okay? The first is around space. What's the ideal space for conversation? Is this the ideal space for conversation? Are we feeling in our heart we are the right space for conversation? Is our head open enough for new thoughts and conversation? So if we have the first ace of space, we could think, what are times in your life when you've had enough space for great conversation? Now, I have, once a year, we get together with 3 couples, and we go to a different place. One, we live in Belgium, the other lives in Spain, the other lives in France, and we get together once a year for a long weekend with lots of activities. One of my girlfriend's girlfriend is a super organizer. So there's a program, there's an agenda. We're going to see this museum, we're going to go to this place, we're going to go to that fountain, we're going to eat at this restaurant, going to walk in over here. And then somewhere on the agenda, there's this FT, free time. But every time we get together, where are the best conversations? Free time. Yeah? So we need to build free time into our lives in order to have that spontaneity, right? Some years ago, I walked to Santiago de Compostela. So it's like 900 kilometers, a couple months of walking, gives you a lot of time to think about things. And one of the brilliant things that happens is your mind starts emptying out of all the garbage that we accumulate from day to day. And you bump into other people who are in the same process. And you're walking on this metaphorical path away from your past towards your future. And when I talked to people there about the kind of conversations they were having, they didn't just describe them as conversations. They described them as the most powerful moments of their life because they had space to really explore what's going on. And there was no one else they knew there except for this stranger they met on the path. So why not be totally honest about it? Totally recognized by the other person. So I know you're all busy people. Maybe you don't have time to walk 3 months to Santiago de Compostela. You're thinking, well, okay, what about in my life? So here's 2 tips. Well, there's 3 tips. First, you can get a dog walking. Some great conversations have happened just walking the dog. But here's 2 more kind of practical things. The first is about creating space. You've got a plan to have some unplanned space, free time, FT on the agenda. Second is going to some places where you're kind of trapped. You ever go on an airplane and you're looking out the window, looking at the clouds go by and new types of thoughts start generating? When we are in a place where we know we're going to be for a while, we somehow liberate ourselves to be open to the moment. And that can be on a park bench or a walk in the woods. So you can go to these spaces, you can create these spaces. Now, if you, like most people, you have a bit of space, the problem is the rest of the world keeps kind of encroaching in on our space. So let's say you call up a friend who you haven't seen for a while, you say, let's get back in touch, it'd be nice to have a little time to talk to each other. But you're sitting there at the table, and on the table, there's a telephone. Now, it might not be doing anything, very innocent. It might beep, it could ring. If it beeps, will you look at it? If it rings, will you pick it up? But just its presence and a glance to it is really killing the conversation. Haven't you ever been with someone at lunch and they have that happen and you're like, who's more important here? Are you with me? Are you listening to me? Or are you waiting for, the pizza delivery man to give you a call? It's not that important. What's important is the person in front of us. So phones off the table and try to create a protective bubble between you and the person you're with, or the 2 people you're with. If you've ever seen those great romance films, where just the moment where the couple falls in love and they look in each other's eyes, everything else goes blurry. There's a focus on these 2 people, right? Everything else is a blur. That's the kind of intensity you want in your bubble, and push out everything else that's not important for that conversation. Okay, so that's about space. And we've touched already on people, but I would like you to do a little experiment right now. I'd like you to freeze your face. So if I were to take a photo, just of you and you, what would we see in that photo? What kind of expression is on your face? Is it an expression that's saying, come talk to me? Or this is not a good time, right? So the face is the second idea. What signal are you emitting? What signal are you putting out in kind of trying to find what's the essence of conversation? I was discussing it with one of my conversation partners, and she was saying, I'm fascinated by the turning points before and after. And she said the turning point for her was when she started to see people coming to her for conversation. And it had to do with, previously, she was emitting a signal of, I'm busy. And she read a book about storytelling and had this line, everybody has a story to tell. And when she started emitting that signal, the stories start flooding towards her. So we have the space, we have the face, and the face is quite psychological, right? I mean, we heard earlier about connection, but the promise is you're going to be more connected. The challenge is we fear rejection. So how can you, as a conversationalist, say, come towards me, it's okay, who you are is perfect. Okay, so that's kind of deep. Let's try something, fast forward to something a little easier. Just go to a different place. If you want to, where are the most inspirational places for conversation? And you might want to go to a mountaintop or a seaside, but the best conversations often happen at the kitchen table, at the corner cafe, on a bench. So simply going to a place can really help create that atmosphere. And you're looking for an atmosphere of possibility. Whether you're talking about sports, love, or business, what's the environment that's going to stimulate that? But also, people want to stay in their safety zone sometimes. So recognizing that maybe not everybody wants to jump into a giant brainstorming session. Where are they comfortable? What's their skill set? Not going to pull them out of there, but letting them know that it's okay. Let's try. Let's experiment. So we've got those three. Now the last one is a little trickier, because this is about dialogue in the workplace, which means hidden agendas. And really, I would just like to give two pieces of advice here. And the first is a kind of set of questions of get in touch with what you're really trying to do. Because if you're inviting big group dialogue at your office, usually there's some objective. Let's sell something. Let's make something. Let's bring this KPI needs to be tweaked. And bring it down to the deeper level of make it real questions. What's our true intention with this? Why are we coming together? What's the purpose? So we have an intention for collaboration rather than let's meet a specific objective, because specific objectives can kill the conversation. All right. Before I leave this stage, I'd like you to think about one topic that you really want to talk about. One topic in your mind, you say, I want to talk about that. I'm going to give you 4 cards, imaginary cards in your hand. The first is about having more free time, more space. How will you make the mental space to have that conversation? Second, who are the people you want to invite to that conversation? What will you consciously be emitting to send a signal of conversation to those people? Third, what's the place that this conversation has to happen? And fourth, if it's a work thing, what's the unification of the intention? What's the group shared intention for that conversation? Now, under 4 chairs in this room, there are 4 tickets for a conversation. So you have to reach under your chair right now. And 4 people in the room have taped to the bottom of the chair a blue envelope. Blue like blue this. So sneaking around, it could be you. Okay, so we've got one over here. Looks like that. There should be one over here somewhere, I think, and one over there. One in the back. So if you have the envelope, hold up the envelope, right? So these 4 people, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, all right. So you got the 4 envelopes. You're going to find each other at the break. I want you to have a conversation. What are you going to talk about? So it's a conversation about how conversations shape views. Views shape lives. Lives shape the world we share. So go ahead and shape those conversations, because that is an idea worth sharing.